We are live, ladies and gemins. This is how it goes. You know how I get down. And it's the one and only Joey Nuggs along with Javier from Courtroom Annex. And we're waiting for the judge to read the final sentencing at the Darrell Brooks case. We were talking back and forth with one another the difference between what concurrency was, which basically means they stack all the stuff and run them one on one. He was trying to play that he's crazy and doesn't know what's going on kind of deal, but he broke character when she started talking about putting out those years on her. So that's basically what he's been trying to run. In case you ain't been figuring that out, he's trying to run that he's crazy and he didn't know what he was doing. That's what his family and as well as his best friend that were all came earlier and did their.
Yeah, they talk to those three talk to each other. The mom, the baby
Oh
mama.
yeah.
Yeah,
Okay, we're back here. He's back. So let's see what's gonna go happen here.
He got the bailiffs next to him now.
Yeah, Casey tries to act a fool. This is usually this time right here. This is when everything gets serious and all that bullshit goes flying out the window of him trying to act like he's a tough guy and don't know what's going on. If you're gonna see him break character, when she throws them big football numbers at his ass, you're gonna see him break character. Then he'll understand what's going on. Then.
I wanted the judge to be like, objection, relevancy during his speech. That would have been,
yeah, it would have been the best.
The prosecutor.
I've been sitting over here munching on raisins. Jeez, I love raisins. Trying to stay away from a whole lot of junk food if I can handle it. Raisins got sugar in them, but at least they're a dried grape. Never been a prune eater. Ever eat prunes?
Yeah, they're pretty good.
Yeah, prunes they're all right. They're strong. They're big dried
They're
ones.
dried figs, right?
I don't think they're a fig. I think they're a prune. Prune is what is a prune?
I think it's no, it's a
They're a plum.
yeah, plum, a dried plum. That's what I
Dried
meant.
plum. That's what it is. Plum.
Because I got a fig tree. Those motherfuckers
We're
are
sitting there
good.
quiet. Usually we hear something.
I don't think the judge is out yet.
No. We usually hear something in the background of people talking.
Oh, there she comes.
Thank you, everyone. Please
Here we
be
go.
seated.
Sit your ass down, bitch.
Get ready to hear it. Watch his ass break character, then he won't act like he's crazy in a minute.
All right, we are back on the record in State versus
Thank you, everyone.
Brooks.
Please
Appearances are as they were
gonna mute.
before. I want to give you all a little bit of my roadmap for my remarks here today and what will ultimately conclude with the sentencing. I'm going to start with a review, frankly, of Mr. Brooks's NGI plea. Now, wasn't going to start out doing that, but I feel compelled to make a record of certain things in light of many of the statements that were made here today by Mr. Brooks and his family. Following that, I'm going to talk about the case, the strength of the case, the witnesses and evidence that was presented, and some of the things that really impacted me throughout that time and throughout the nearly 4 weeks of trial. Then I will spend some time talking about the victims, their victim impact statements, and again, things that have stood out here to me. I cannot comment on all of the victim statements that have been made, but there are a few that I do want to highlight. And then ultimately, go through the sentencing factors. Because all of these things I'm going to talk about relate to those factors, which in Wisconsin, there are 3 primary factors: the seriousness of the offense, the need to protect the public, and the character and rehabilitative needs of the defendant. So I want to start sort of near the end of all of the remarks over the last couple of days, and that is with my thoughts on Mr. Brooks and his mental health. I'm not here to debate that you have had a history over time of intersecting with the mental health agencies, and that you may have in your history trauma, emotional pain, and things of that nature. I have read through not one, not two, not three, but 4 reports from experts, people who are well known in this field of what we call forensic psychology and psychiatry, individuals who have an expertise in evaluating a plea of not guilty by reason of mental disease or defect. Because I don't want there to be any doubt in my sentencing here today that I've considered that. But I also don't want there to be any doubt that somehow this trial was missing something. Because the fact is, Mr. Brooks entered a special plea of not guilty by reason of mental disease or defect in the early summer, maybe late spring of this year. And this court ordered 3 court-ordered evaluations, and the state retained an expert to also review the issue. Whether the defense team at that point ever hired anyone, they are not required to disclose that. I don't know, but I have 4 well-known doctors who have written this court based upon the orders that were made, or one doctor being retained. And these are reports that are thorough. One report is 24 pages, another is more of a summary, it's 8 pages, another is 26 pages, and then another is 12. And they look at the discovery information, so police reports, videographic evidence, things of that nature. They have access to any mental health related records from prior stays or things like that. They look at a history, they meet with Mr. Brooks. I've referenced this in the past when competency wasn't so much raised by any of the parties here, but during the trial there was, as Attorney Opper wanted to make a record one day of Mr. Brooks's competency. And I will restate what I stated at that point. I have absolutely no doubt that Mr. Brooks is competent. I'm obviously well versed in the legal standard, but that is not something that this court was frankly ever concerned about at any point in time. I know that his attorneys, when he had attorneys, never raised the issue. And it was really only after the trial began that that issue was raised, I think, by the public based upon what they saw. But Attorney Opper, like myself, had the benefit of having reviewed each and every one of these examinations. And I'm not going to spend a lot of time, but I think it's important because it goes also to Mr. Brooks's character, which is one of the things that this court must consider along with his rehabilitative needs. And I'm going to read parts of these evaluations so that you all understand the information that I have and why it is my opinion that mental health issues did not cause him to do what he did on November 21 of 2021, and frankly did not play a role. That's not to say that he wasn't diagnosed with something. I've referenced this previously, but that's an antisocial personality disorder. And this is what one of the reports has to say. They've looked at one doctor indicated that there was available evidence to sustain a diagnosis of cannabis abuse, intoxication, antisocial personality disorder, adjustment disorder with mixed disturbance of emotions and conduct. And the reports go on to describe what those things are and that they may qualify as an abnormal condition of the mind substantially affecting mental or emotional processes, and thus as a mental disease or defect as broadly defined by the Wisconsin jury instructions, and that's at least as to the adjustment disorder. Cannabis abuse or intoxication would not. The diagnosis of antisocial personality disorder, and this is what the doctor said, reflects converging support of an underlying characterological disorder versus a major mental illness. In Mr. Brooks's case, I would note his history of disregarding the rights of others and conforming to societal norms, including in the forms of multiple acts of violence beginning in his youth, contacts with the criminal justice system, lack of remorse as indicated by being indifferent, rationalizing, etc. The doctor goes on that it's her understanding that this characterological condition would not qualify as a mental disease or defect as defined by the applicable statute, which also specifies that mental disease or defect does not include an abnormality manifested only by repeated criminal or otherwise antisocial conduct. Goes on to talk about her opinion regarding criminal non-responsibility. And the examiner rendered an opinion to a reasonable degree of professional certainty that there was not support for the defendant's special plea, that the facts at hand do not sustain a conclusion to a reasonable degree of professional certainty that because of symptoms of a mental disease or defect, Mr. Brooks was rendered to lack substantial capacity either to appreciate the wrongfulness of the alleged misconduct or conform his conduct to the requirements of the law at the time in question. In arriving at this opinion, the following considerations were significant to this examiner. While acknowledging Mr. Brooks' documented history of episodic contacts with mental health professionals beginning in adolescence, most of the time he has had such contacts or received mental health treatment when in custody. In effect, there is not a sustained, documented history of a diagnosed major mental illness for him predating the alleged offense or otherwise. Looked at a psychiatric review from April of 2010. At that point, the defendant was determined to have no medically determinable impairment on which to qualify for disability benefits. The consultant who conducted the review noted that Mr. Brooks' claimed mental illness was not, quote, well established, quote, that the statements that he made at that point were not deemed credible, they were inconsistent and not verified by treatment providers in the community. Factor number 2, the defendant's history of violence beginning years predating the alleged offense is significant. He faced multiple prior domestic-related charges. He was not permitted in his mother's home because of the history of violence. To be sure, the magnitude and lethality of Mr. Brooks's violence in the commission of the alleged offenses is more severe than what was previously known. However, the defendant's history of a pattern of violent behavior, coupled with other aspects of his history, and this case strongly suggests that his mental state, which produced the alleged offenses, was most fundamentally formed and fueled by contributions of his underlying characterological dysfunction, anger, and rage born of his conflict with his girlfriend moments before the Christmas parade tragedy. The examiner considered Mr. Brooks's episodic endorsement of auditory hallucinations, including on clinical interview with the undersigned, meaning the examiner, and in a couple of recorded jail phone calls subsequent to his arrest. She said this, I am unaware of any objective corroboration that he presented, either in the hours leading up to or following the alleged offenses, as internally preoccupied or otherwise exhibiting signs of impaired reality, contact, or behavioral discontrol. To the contrary, the defendant's conduct within hours of the onset and moments following the alleged misconduct was organized, controlled, and purposeful. Moreover, he demonstrated the motivation and capacity to take efforts to evade detection and try to flee the immediate area of the parade carnage. She went on, I have considered the seemingly inexplicable nature and magnitude of the violence and mayhem wrought by the defendant's conduct on the day in question. He has caused 6 deaths, dozens of injuries, and terrorized hundreds of parade participants and thousands of spectators. There is no indication in the extensive compilation of records and other information available that at the time of the alleged misconduct, he lacked substantial capacity to either control or conform his conduct to the requirements of the law, or that his reality contact capacity to appreciate wrongfulness was substantially impaired. In the context of rage born of his conflict and altercation with his former girlfriend, Turmoil, the defendant was disinclined to control his behavior or attend to its consequences. Notwithstanding the magnitude of the violence in this case, a mental disease or defect is not defined by the unnaturalness or enormity of the act. Moreover, temporary passion or frenzy prompted by revenge, hatred, jealousy, envy, or the like does not constitute a mental disease or defect. She goes on to talk about the course of functioning of Mr. Brooks during the day leading up to the alleged offense. Does not suggest that he was behaviorally dysregulated or that his reality contact was impaired. Goes on to talk about what he did in the immediate aftermath of the parade, including fleeing the vicinity, making efforts to evade detection or responsibility, and other things. Went on to discuss other evidence, including the videographic evidence of the Ring doorbell and being on the porch where he sought to use the phone. He had apparently discarded a couple of small bags, later determined to contain marijuana, and presumably, this is the examiner again, he discarded items to evade responsibility for possessing them. By implication, such conduct strongly suggests his capacity to appreciate wrongfulness was then intact. When responding to law enforcement officials, he followed their commands. He lowered himself to the ground. We saw that on the recording of his arrest when he was taken into custody and detained. None of the behaviors nor verbal remarks at the time of the arrest suggest he was behaviorally dysregulated or that his reality contact was impaired. Following his arrest and being taken into custody, he engaged in an informal series of verbal exchanges with authorities, and none of his statements taken at face value suggest he was then actively psychotic or that his behavior controls were substantially impaired. She then goes on to talk about the Mirandized statements. This court personally watched every minute of that interaction with Detective Carpenter and Detective Stern, along with the one from the night before, which was at the hospital within hours. And I would concur with the examiner's conclusions that the content of his initial statements to authorities included multiple efforts to deceive or mislead. He changed his story multiple times, including he initially denied being in Waukesha the prior Saturday. He initially asserted he traveled to Waukesha on the day in question in a tan Kia with a friend. He initially asserted his mother did not own a vehicle, though later acknowledged as much, and that he used it from time to time. Other changes in his story over the course of his statements and the nature of them further suggest that he was making active attempts to evade detection or responsibility. By implication, such behavior strongly suggests that his reality contact was then intact. When he was shown photographs of driving in the SUV into the parade route, he indicated it was not him. And this is again the examiner. With the police. She's noting the police contact. It was not until Mr. Brooks was in the booking area of the Waukesha County Jail that he displayed some emotion, and this was to, I believe, Detective Stern, where he said, "I didn't mean to kill nobody." Such a remark indicates an awareness of the consequences of his actions, and runs counter to a conclusion of an exculpatory mental disease or defect. There's other criteria or other factors. I'm not going to read them all. That was probably one of the more comprehensive explanations of why that examiner did not conclude that there was support for the special plea of not guilty by reason of mental disease or defect. All four examiners shared similar observations. Certainly their conclusions were that there was not support for the special plea. One examiner talked about, again, conduct after driving through the parade, abandoning the vehicle used in the act, altering his appearance by removing his outer layer of clothing, altering how he was wearing his hair, and then engaging in further efforts to leave the scene by securing transportation via a ride-sharing application. This particular examiner went on to say, while he essentially, meaning Mr. Brooks, disclaimed any memory of those actions and could therefore not explain them, such behaviors strongly suggest an awareness of wrongdoing and a desire to avoid detection. Another examiner had very similar things: antisocial personality disorder with borderline features, talked about the cannabis use disorder and full remission in a controlled environment. What's interesting about this particular report is the description of an antisocial personality disorder. The DSM-5 defines antisocial personality disorder as a pervasive pattern of disregard for a violation of the rights of others occurring since age 15 years, as indicated by three or more of the following: failure to conform to social norms with respect to lawful behaviors, as indicated by repeated performing acts that are grounds for arrest. 2, deceitfulness, as indicated by repeated lying, use of aliases, or conning others for personal profit or pleasure. 3, impulsivity or failure to plan ahead. 4, irritability and aggressiveness, as indicated by repeated physical fights or assaults. 5, reckless disregard for safety of self and others. 6, consistent irresponsibility, as indicated by repeated failure to sustain consistent work behavior or honor financial obligations. 7, lack of remorse, as indicated by being indifferent to or rationalizing having hurt, mistreated, or stolen from another. In addition, the individual is at least 18 years old and there is evidence of a conduct disorder prior to the age of 15. This examiner noted Mr. Brooks meets nearly all of the symptoms described above because he has exhibited a long-term maladaptive pattern of behavior involving a disregard for and violation of the rights of others, beginning in childhood and continuing through adult life. The borderline features reflect a general inability to sustain healthy relationships with others, including his domestically violent relationship with victim PPP. That examiner goes on with further analysis and conclusions, again finding that there is not support. The last examiner, again, made similar conclusions, also diagnosing Mr. Brooks with an antisocial personality disorder. Why is that important? There is no doubt that in our criminal justice system today, we face a crisis of the mentally ill intersecting in our courts. In the last year and a half alone, this court has ordered many competency evaluations, presided over a number of contested competency hearings, and ordered many, many evaluations for the special plea of not guilty by reason of mental disease or defect. And the bottom line is, for this court, Mr. Brooks does not present as a person who was either not competent or not guilty by reason of mental disease or defect. It is frankly heartbreaking to see those individuals who truly suffer from schizophrenia, for example, intersect in our criminal justice system. Sometimes they do unspeakable things. They hurt other people. I'm thinking of one such gentleman who was so schizophrenic and out of control. He couldn't even be kept in the courtroom. He was too loud. He clearly, if you've ever been in the room with someone who is suffering from auditory or visual hallucinations, it is not something you easily forget. It makes an impression, even on someone like myself who's not an MD or a doctorate level psychologist. I've been in the room with an individual who was, when I did defense work, and he was accused of killing someone near and dear to him. It's a very, very different presentation. It's heartbreaking. It's heart-wrenching. Do the mentally ill sometimes commit atrocious crimes? They do. This is not one of those situations. We've heard Mr. Brooks's family talk about mental illness and bipolar. You know, in addition, before I get to that, I've also had, over my 11 years on the bench, of coming face to face with evil on occasion. There are many times, good people do bad things, but there are times when evil people do bad things. There is no medication or treatment for a heart that is bent on evil. Child trauma, bipolar, indifference, physical abuse of a child, or even childhood trauma did not cause Darrell Brooks to commit the acts for which he will be sentenced here today. It is very clear to this court that he understands the difference between right and wrong, and that he simply chooses to ignore his conscience. He is fueled by anger and rage. Some people, unfortunately, choose a path of evil. And I think, Mr. Brooks, you are one of those such persons. As a mom, my heart breaks for your family, for your mom, and for your grandmother. The son that she raised, the grandson that your grandmother knew, the hopes and dreams they had for your life, they're gone. And I think it's perhaps far easier for them to blame a mental illness than to perhaps come to grips with their son did very, very bad things due to very bad motivations. One of the things ultimately that will happen when you are in prison, sir, is that the Department of Corrections, they are statutorily responsible for your care and your well-being, including your mental health. I do not have any authority to dictate to them where you go or how they treat you. That is far different than when there is support for a plea of not guilty by reason of mental disease or defect, because then the court has available what is called treatment facilities and a commitment to such a treatment facility. That is something that is simply not on the table. And again, 4 evaluations, not even my own assessment, but 4 evaluations from licensed professionals say otherwise, even in the face of your family saying that, and even in the face of you claiming that. I'm not even here to say that some of those things can't coexist, and you might not have some of your own mental health issues, whether it be bipolar, childhood trauma, or things of that nature. But the bottom line is none of that caused you to do what you did on November 21 of 2021. I want to next turn to the trial in this case. And I think it's important that the sentence here today focuses on your conduct on November 21 of 2021 and the moments leading up to that tragic and fateful decision of yours to drive through the Waukesha Christmas parade, and of course the moments after. I, of course, through my sentencing remarks and ultimately what I do here today, I can't answer all of the questions. I can't address all of the issues, including the why. Perhaps the one question that will remain unanswered. Why? Why did you barrel down White Rock Avenue? Why did you not stop? Why did you keep going? Many of us in this courtroom sat through the entire trial. And what we learned is that very early on in the afternoon of November 21, starting at around 1 p.m., the police got ready for the parade. The staging area was set up, and that was all along White Rock Avenue. Signs were put in place. Ultimately, barricades were put up at a number of locations on Main Street and surrounding that. We know, because we heard from Sergeant Warner about what he had done, and he had, right before the start of the parade, had driven down the parade route. It was on his shoulders, his responsibility to make sure everything was safe and in order. What's important about that staging area, sir, is we know that that is where the altercation with Erica Patterson really came to a head. We all watched that video, multiple videos. And we know that even before that, you appeared angry and upset. 2 individuals testified about you being at that mobile gas station, how you turned the wrong way down a one-way street, waved your hands in the air, rolled down your window, either exchanged gestures or words with one of the drivers. Perhaps 30 minutes or so before the start of the parade, maybe an hour or so before you drove down the parade route. But what's important is the signage. Even you, at one point, I believe when you were talking with Detective Carpenter, noted, it was my words, my assessment, it was clear something was going on. I think what you said was a lot of shit was blocked off. You'd driven past those signs on the staging area. The fact remains they were there, sir. And the fact remains is you told Detective Carpenter that. We then heard from the witnesses related to Ms. Patterson. We heard from Corey Runkle. We heard from Erica Patterson herself. My impression, based upon Erica Patterson's testimony, who, by the way, she showed grace and dignity facing you, the man who clearly has no regard for her as a mother of one of your children, as someone you had a domestic partnership with and a relationship with at one point.
That's not true.
We know, and I would say this goes to your character, what was shown through that altercation and going up the hill, following her, slapping her. You know, the rules don't matter to you, not the rules of the road, not the rules established by court orders, not the rules even of decorum and decency. And I'll get to this more fully when I talk about your character. And I know you went hard at Attorney Opper for her bringing these things up, but those are legitimate, lawful sentencing considerations. And when I get to that point, I'll tell you the case law that supports that. Your character, even your pending cases.
I don't need no case law.
We know at the time of all of this, right, you were out on bond for 2 felony cases, one involving a handgun, one involving the same vehicle and Erica Patterson, and one involving ultimately intimidation of Ms. Patterson. We know that on November 20th, and she was very contrite about this. She told you where she was. She invited you out there. And that you had contact with her on the 20th. There was some physical.
Contact with her on the 20th.
Mr. Brooks, this is my time. You need to not interrupt.
That's the reason why the charge was dropped.
Mr. Brooks,
the state
you need to stop.
said specifically, wrote you, Your Honor, and said that they know it was no incident that day.
Mr.
And now
Brooks,
you want to sit up here.
do not interrupt me
you-
or you will be removed to the other
and now you
courtroom.
want to sit up here
Stop
and try
now.
to add something in that you know for a fact never even happened. You want to sit up here
Mr.
and talk
Brooks,
about
every
who has
time-
grace and all this. You talking about someone with 5 kids that don't have custody.
You need to stop
None of
right
them.
now or you will be removed.
Remove me then.
All right? He will be removed. He cannot simply stay
I don't
quiet when
consent
this
to being
court talks.
sentenced anyway. I don't consent to this. Just like I told you, I don't know the.
He'll be in recess
I
until he's
don't
removed to
even
the other
understand
courtroom.
the true nature and cause.
She should have thrown her shoe at his ass. but then he'd get a mistrial over that.
This is the best. You knew he was going to break character following the end and finally know him come out and start screaming some
Couldn't take
bitch ass
it.
shit.
Hey, I thought he was gonna get the mental disease thing.
She wasn't playing that stuff. She knew he wasn't that.
Yeah,
He wasn't
nobody
crazy.
knew about those evaluations though. So I was like, oh shit.
Oh yeah, you didn't know about it, but she knew about it.
Yeah, I was like, oh.
Oh yeah, she did. She did her due diligence. She was on top of her game. That's one thing you could say anything about that judge. She was really on top of her game. She was thorough, very professional, so they couldn't give
Yeah.
any kind of reason that there'd be a mistrial.
She hit her
No.
bias so well that I thought she was gonna be on Brooks' side.
Yeah, she was awesome. She was good at it.
Her bias.
But now she's the jury. The jury's already been spoken. Now she's the judge. She's gonna hand down that big one on him. Ba ba bam.
Somebody said he was gonna get like hundreds of years, but you do the math, it's somewhere around 200-300 years.
We'll see what she gives him. That'll be interesting.
I thought it was like 700 or 800 years. Somebody said that on a chat room. Here we go. Looks like this is the.
No, I just took off the overlay. She's basically just putting him in the other room now.
Yeah, I was just waiting for it.
Yeah, he's gonna. Well, throw me out then. You knew it was gonna happen. It was bitch ass.
He's always trying to get control of the court. Even right there, throw me out there. He's like saying, "Okay, do it."
Do it then.
Because I said so, kind of thing.
Yeah, it was. I tell you, I will. Here goes in the back.
Yeah. Put him in the timeout box.
So you people out there that I don't know who's tuned in, or who's viewing, this is the Joey Nuggs Show. My buddy Javier from Courtroom Annex, another YouTube channel here, and we're watching Darrell Brooks sentencing. The judge is reading the final sentencing. He just showed his butt once more, and he got put in the timeout room. He's in a penalty box like he's at the hockey game. They put him in a separate room. They put his ass in timeout, Javier.
Give him
He
a
said-
few minutes.
Put him in a penalty box.
A few minutes of timeout before you get your life of timeout.
Exactly. He's got nothing but time coming up, ladies and gentlemen. Oh man, I've been watching this for a while. I don't know. I can see why this trial was so popular, because unlike other trials, don't get me wrong, all trials are very important because, these families are broken up. But this guy has, if you can watch anything, he's been very entertaining.
Yeah, I bet you he's gonna fuck up those monitors right there to his right. Those ones that are sideways. I
I
can
can
just
see him finally lose it. He's just
Is he
going
gonna
to
throw that monitor in front of him or the ones to the side of him?
Oh yeah, he's gonna go ape. He's gonna go bat ape crazy, ape shit crazy. He's just gonna lose it and just start busting the place up. That's why there's so many sheriffs
Get him
around
the
him.
headphones.
They're ready, dude. They're ready for stuff to jump off, man.
The headphones
They,
are the best.
yeah.
They don't even need to prove any. He doesn't even need to listen anymore. He's already pretty much sentenced, right?
No, she hasn't. No, she hasn't. She hasn't read the sentence.
Oh
He
no!
interrupted her.
So once he's sentenced, his
Oh yeah, oh yeah. Once she reads off what she's giving him, it's a wrap. Call Reynolds, man. All he's got to do is sit back then and put the rest of his miserable life behind bars. He ain't ever getting out, brother.
He's gonna get treated different right after he gets read the sentence. That's why he's trying to avoid it, right?
Oh, he's gonna be. He mean different. He's just waiting to go to prison. Here goes.
Well, you can't say First Amendment this or that.
Mr.
Yeah, exactly. Here we go.
Brooks is able to hear
See
and
what they
see
have
the
to say.
court. We do have the audio and visual on. If someone, I can see on the screen, there is a head set on the table should he choose, but I have confirmation that the audio and visual are working in the other courtroom. Before I continue, of course, Mr. Brooks does have a right to be present for his sentencing. He's been present all along today up until his disruption. It was very clear to this court that he had absolutely no intention of stopping his tirade. I think there's really no other way to describe it. And this court needs to go through its remarks uninterrupted. And given the history in this case, which is well documented, of his disruptions and inability or unwillingness to follow the very simple rules of decorum and courtesy, which include not interrupting the court, I felt it important under Illinois versus Allen to remove him from the courtroom. As that is, of course, one of the options, and we have the benefit of the wonderful technology here in this courtroom and the adjoining courtroom, which I believe is the equivalent of being present, what I have referred to at times during this trial as the functional equivalent of being present in this very courtroom. But it is important that I go through this without interruption to make the record that I need to make. I'm going to backtrack. No, you're not muted, sir. You're going to listen to me, and you're not going to interrupt. So I want to, I don't want to call it a tangent, but I'm looking for a note that I made. Then you need to pledge to this court, sir, that you will not interrupt me despite what you may not like me saying. Can you do that? All right, he's not making that pledge, and under Illinois versus Allen, unless he makes that pledge, he's not coming back into this courtroom. You are not. All right, clearly he's going to keep repeating that statement, so I have muted him at this point. It was my hope that he would honor the simple rule of courtesy and decorum, that he show respect to this court, to these proceedings, and not interrupt and talk over me, but that clearly is something he is unwilling or unable to do. I'll find my note that I wrote later. It had to do with, frankly, what this court has observed as a pattern with Mr. Brooks, and that is when testimony or statements by the court or statements by the prosecution team become unfavorable to him, he lashes out and he disrupts. And that has been borne out time after time after time during this trial. So let me go through and pick up where I left off about the trial. I'm not going to go through everything in detail, but I think it's important that I set the stage, right, and the basis for my sentencing. One of the things that I did note regarding Erica Patterson's testimony, because frankly, I wasn't sure where Mr. Brooks was going to go with his own defense, based on some of the remarks he made during his opening statement, which was actually later, but I guess I'll go back to my review of his recorded interview and some of the things that he tried to say, and at least it became apparent ultimately with the way he cross-examined witnesses. I wasn't sure if he would claim perhaps someone else was in the vehicle, he was afraid of police, the tinting of the windows, some of those things. Here's where it frankly doesn't matter, okay? Erica Patterson provided key testimony in this regard, that there was no one else in the vehicle with Mr. Brooks. And I'm aware that he wants to come back, but until he writes me a pledge that he will not interrupt me under Illinois versus Allen, he is not coming back in this courtroom. He has forfeited his right to be present during my remarks. And unless he makes that pledge to me in writing, he's not coming back in. One of the things I tried to do in my preparation, and let me tell you, I reviewed all of my notes from this trial. I have, I think, 9 notepads. I looked at just a couple of exhibits, but primarily the map, Exhibit 15. I really wanted to determine for myself how long this carnage took. We know the distance, right? From at least where he entered. And you know what, Madam Clerk, put my screen up, will you?
Sure. Let me see. Is there a video conference?
I'm going to put Exhibit 15 up because I think it's worth doing that. All right. We know he entered from White Rock, where the first star is on the right side, where it says Fleet 1, unmarked sedan and marked SUV. And that's where Detective Casey was. And so we know he goes 1, 2, 3 blocks before striking anyone. And then it's really about 5 blocks of what can only be described as chaos and carnage. We know we have, from the evidence and the testimony, 2 different speed calculations. One from Bosco's, that was the surveillance footage, between 33 and 34 and a half miles per hour. And then we have one farther down from the footage from Curry Insurance, where it was an average 32 miles per hour. Now, I acknowledge math is not my strong suit. I did not do a calculation, but I don't think it took very long for all of this to happen. I think it was a matter of minutes. I think 5 minutes would even be far too long. It's probably 3, maybe. And it was somewhat hard to gauge during the trial because of how the state presented, and I don't mean this as a criticism, but they were very meticulous in showing video, breaking it down, showing it at half speed, sometimes 30% speed, to really get an understanding of what was happening. And at no point did anyone ever tell me or tell the jury how long this took. But even though it took just a couple of minutes, there were so many opportunities for Mr. Brooks to simply stop, turn around, turn down other streets before he ever crossed Barstow Avenue. And what we know is that at 4:37, Detective Tom Casey had the first police encounter with Darrell Brooks. Came face to face, Detective Casey at the hood of the car, coming eye to eye. The SUV brushed past him. And here's the thing, Detective Casey said he wasn't going very fast. To me, that tells me he had ample time to reflect about what he was about to do. If you look on that map, it's not a pledge, he's not coming in. When you come down White Rock, you can take a hard left on East Main Street. You can take what I call a soft left. I believe it's Pleasant Street. And Detective Casey, you can correct me if I'm wrong. I can't see it on the map. Frankly, you can turn around at any point in time on White Rock Avenue. But instead, and I think if you all try to picture this, as difficult as it may be, there's squads with lights, there's barricades. I know I read in the other act's motion that Mr. Brooks claimed at one point he was having a panic attack, and he, again, maybe I think he was going to claim at some point he was afraid of police. Why drive toward them? Why take that right-hand turn? There's no reasonable explanation other than he was angry, he was full of rage, and he didn't care who he came in contact with, what he came in contact with, whether he drove past, through, at, he drove. Detective Casey pounded on the hood of that car, saw his face, again, was brushed by that SUV, thankfully not hurt. All of this preceded by the visual signs along White Rock Avenue of the staging of this parade. Floats, bands, banners, signs, people. And as you got closer to Main Street, the spectators lining those streets, which both, I believe, Detective Casey and Sergeant Warner said were thousands of people. Before he ever gets to Barstow Avenue, he comes in contact with, after Detective Casey, Officer Buttrin and Officer Schneider. He has an opportunity, if you look at this map, he could go right on Buckley. Again, there might be police, there might be barricades. You simply stop. You ask, can I get out? No doubt in my mind, any police officer there would have done just that. He could have gone left on Northeast Avenue. Continuing down, he could have gone left on Martin Street. Continuing on, Barstow Avenue. This is where the parade participants, unfortunately, he has contact with them, but he could have gone right on Barstow. He could have gone left on Barstow. And we know from some of the footage that we saw that his car was seen flying past, true, not hitting one at this point, but flying past. There's no logical understanding for Mr. Brooks other than he's in the middle of a parade and he can see them. Anyone driving a vehicle would see what's ahead. And we know from this map, right, what was ahead of him. We saw that video footage. We heard the testimony. Many police vehicles at these intersections with their lights flashing. There's no doubt in my mind that Mr. Brooks would understand a parade was going on. You can turn off my monitor, thank you. We also know it was not yet dark. Dusk. This was from the battalion chief who talked about when he arrived after that first alert at 4:39, it was not yet dark, it was dusk. I think that aids to the visibility that Mr. Brooks would have seen all of these people. This is not under cover of night. It's, of course, downtown Waukesha. We saw city lights in many of the street lights I'm referring to in many of the videos as well that would have been on or coming on. We know just past Barstow, he strikes his first victim, Nicole White. She was with Remax Services with the hot air balloon. If anyone's seen that, we saw it in the video. That is unmistakable what that is. That would get anyone's attention. If this was a mistake, if he was lost, this was his very first opportunity to stop and do the right thing after causing injury to a person. But he didn't. He did not stop. And then, of course, the Waukesha South Band. It's hard not to think about what I watched and not have this reaction. Those were images that frankly kept me up at night, that I saw over and over and over. For their band director, she is a hero to me, to get up on the stand, to talk about, and that was Sarah Waymeyer Aparicio, to identify each one of her students, talk about their formation, talk about what she saw. So strong for all of you. Mr. Brooks had another opportunity to stop. This wasn't one isolated person that he could claim, I didn't know I struck someone. This was driving over people. What Kyle Jewell described as the SUV went over people like they were big old speed bumps. I know the Green children were injured around there. Thankfully, their physical injuries were minor, and I know I could probably spend a long time talking about the injuries of the band members, and I'm not going to go through that. They were significant. It was horrific. Thankfully, none of them were killed. And then, of course, moving on to Burst Logistics. Between the band and the Blazers, that is where Kelly Graybow and her 10-year-old daughter, Adelia, were in that adorable Cindy Lou Who costume. And what struck me, and Kelly referenced this in her statement yesterday, was seeing the tires go past her head after she was hit. Adelia had major injuries as well. And then, of course, the footage from the Waukesha Blazers. And Jeff Rogers talked both at the trial, he testified, and he gave a statement yesterday about, again, having to come into this courtroom, talk about all of those who were with him, who were injured, and of course, little Jackson Sparks. Another video that frankly is very difficult to watch and hard to unsee. You heard not only Jeff, but Josh Craner talk about what happened, and Josh, of course, being struck. And then the Extreme Dance Group. I think it's fair that I didn't fully understand the extent of their injuries until hearing from many of the victims yesterday. I now understand why one of the girls called her aunt and said, "My entire team is dead," because that's what it looked like. It was horrific. And to think of those two brave young ladies who got up during this trial to testify about what they saw, what they did. Jamie and Alyssa, your dancers are proud of you, and because of you, justice has been served. We heard from others, spectators, Deborah Ramirez, regarding herself and her son, that the vehicle was accelerating, not stopping. A moment that sticks out to me was really Mr. Brooks trying to chastise her for not seeking medical attention right away. Her response was perfect. She waited due to the number of injured and all the blood she saw. Understandable. Not something to be chastised for. And then moving on, and again, I know I'm not mentioning everybody. These are just some of the highlights that, and I should call them lowlights, not highlights, but some of the testimony and evidence that really, really impacted the court. Stephanie Bonesteel and her husband testified about what Citizens Bank was doing, hearing the impact against Jane, a very loud thud and an audible gasp from the crowd. Her husband, Adam, was driving the support vehicle, and when he was being cross-examined about why he didn't see the driver, again, he just simply said, "I thought it was my wife that had been hit. All I saw was the red poncho." And the only time we ever heard about brake lights was when Jane Kulik was on that vehicle and he braked so he could get her off the top and run her over. We heard from Matthew Harris, who talked about the red SUV coming straight at them and then veering and going in the direction of the dancing grannies. And again, that audible gasp as he described that eerie sound. He saw a child injured in front, Jane Kulik behind. Actually, the child and Jane Kulik behind, and two victims ahead. He saw two of the dancing grannies. What he described as the SUV traveling faster than the speed limit. What I wrote down from his testimony is he's a combat vet, and this is what he said. "I've never saw anything like this in such a safe area." You could tell he felt bad about not seeking treatment right away for his daughter. He talked about how his wife's a nurse practitioner. And again, he didn't want to direct resources from other victims, that we thought she was okay enough to be home with them. Now, by this time in the parade, it's very clear the spectators are noticing something is not right. The sounds, the atmosphere has changed. They're screaming, there's gasping. There's a noticeable difference. At this point, I believe that Owen was struck, Kelsey was struck. Probably another miracle given the injuries she sustained, the tear in her spleen, significant road rash cuts requiring facial surgery. What Mr. Knapp described the driver as having eyes completely wide open. And then next we heard from Laura Thien, one of the dancing grannies. She talked about the sisterhood. Another brave woman came in, talked about what happened to that group. 7 people injured from her group, 4 fatalities. She said it all happened in a matter of seconds. All I seen was bodies. It looked like a war. The 6 people who were killed suffered multiple blunt force traumatic injuries. severe, significant, some dying instantly. I was impressed by both Dr. Shiel and Dr. Bidzricki. Dr. Bidzricki for her attention to detail, her looking at that vehicle, inspecting it, looking at the heights where certain damage was done and it being consistent in height with the individuals that she did the autopsies on. And of course, Dr. Shiel, and both of these individuals have testified before me, but Dr. Shiel, very shaken from the autopsy of little Jackson Sparks. We then, continuing on, heard from Father Witter, very gracious man. He too talked about how he noticed something unusual, saw an SUV flying down the road, heard thuds. It was faster than anyone in their right mind would be going. He estimated it to be over 25 miles per hour. And then Lucas Hallmark, the off-duty police officer who was walking with his family on that day. He talked about the commotion behind, the large amount of screaming. You could feel it was palpable when he testified about having the wherewithal to try to get his kids out of the way, throwing his 3-year-old as far as he could out of the way. You could see the pain on his face when he talked about not being that successful with his 7-year-old. He said, I wasn't quick enough. He testified that he thought this was a terrorist act, that SUV did not stop. I referenced the speed already, the ACE speed estimation from Detective Carpenter, 33 to 34 miles per hour, a little bit more than that. The speed calculation by Michael Smith from State Patrol from farther down the route of averaging 32 miles per hour. And then, of course, the vehicle inspection by the State Patrol, finding no mechanical issues. There was also the Franklin Assistant Chief who attended the parade. He was near West Main Street in Maple. He provided the testimony regarding the SUV, the window being open, and the driver sticking his head out, looking out. He testified how he thought perhaps it was either a medical emergency, maybe even a mechanical issue, but it was clear once that SUV passed him and he saw that driver. He saw you, Mr. Brooks. No panic, no distress. His heart sank. He knew it was not a medical emergency. The body language just didn't fit. It did not believe it was mechanical at that point either. And then he saw the vehicle crank to the right. As he testified, he seemed excited about what he had done. Another off-duty police officer, this one from Wauwatosa, talked about how he saw Mr. Brooks after the fact crash the vehicle, hear him yell out an expletive and run southbound with his sweatshirt still on. We all saw that video. Of course, at one point, Officer Skolton had contact. And as he testified, he put things together. Keep in mind all of the radio traffic, right, about one person, then like 15 people, and another 15. It was very apparent to him that although he was on the far end, he was around the dog leg on Wisconsin and Maine, that a vehicle had driven through the parade. He saw this vehicle. Of course, at that point, it was heavily damaged. He made the decision to use deadly force. What did he do after? What did Darrell Brooks do after? He crashed the vehicle. He fled the scene in a hurry. He changed his appearance, took off his sweatshirt, loses his shoes, I think in a hurry to get out of there, not caring that they had fallen off. He puts his hair up. We saw that on a number of videos. He asked unsuspecting people to use their phone to call an Uber. All within minutes of all of this happening. He was in such a hurry to get out of there, he left his phone in the SUV. He calls his mother, who arranges for an Uber. We heard from the Uber driver. He never showed up. It was nearby, ultimately, where he was found. And then, of course, the ring footage of his contact with Daniel Ryder. That is at 5:01 p.m. Minutes after all of this happened. Mr. Ryder was astute, noticing that after Mr. Brooks being in his home for maybe 8 to 9 minutes, he saw squads driving by. I think you could say his gut told him something wasn't right. And he had Mr. Brooks go onto the porch, of course, after having given him a sandwich, given him a coat to wear. Ultimately asks him for his coat back. And then, of course, the arrest. This is where some of the lies become evident. Mr. Brooks claims ultimately when he's being interviewed by Detective Carpenter, they have to actually seek medical clearance for him because he claims that he was thrown to the ground when he was arrested. He was not. The video is very clear. He cooperated. He laid down. There was no use of force used at all to take him into custody. But we know ultimately that he lies about what he was doing in Waukesha, how he got there, who he was with. He lies about having contact with Erica Patterson the day before. We know when he's found, he has the Ford Key credit card, not only in his name, but one, whether it's a credit card or like a benefits card, but it's in the name of Erica Patterson, and of course an ID for himself, a state-issued ID. The Ford itself is registered in his mom's name. It's the same address that's on his ID, and there was documentation found in the Ford Escape. He's now in custody. He's taken to the substation, ultimately taken to Waukesha Memorial Hospital. What's notable about the video and audio clips that this court reviewed from the hospital, Mr. Brooks is calm. He's coherent. There's no obvious signs of impairment, no obvious signs or really any signs of mental distress. He makes statements that he's not from the area. He doesn't appear disoriented or confused. At some point, there's kind of a jovial atmosphere between him and one of the detectives. The next day, he lies to Detective Carpenter, denies driving to Waukesha. I got a ride. He makes up the story about a tan Kia. He's very nondescript and vague with the information that he provides. And over the course of those 5 hours, he never once references the parade. He never once says there was another driver. Of course, they start talking to him initially about the domestic altercation because by that time it's very clear a link had been made between Erica Patterson and the call that police originally received of the domestic, or at least an altercation near Frame Park, and Mr. Brooks. We also know, because of the bond conditions in the 2 felony cases, he's not supposed to have any contact with her whatsoever, but he does. At no time during the 5 hours on November 22nd does he make any admissions. Does he show any concern for any of the victims? No empathy, only lies, only concern for himself, for his family. Can I have a phone call? He does not provide, I said this already, the name of anyone else that could be driving that vehicle. At one point, Detective Carpenter says, one of two people drove through the Waukesha Christmas parade. Either a God-fearing person who screwed up or the malicious guy. Darrell Brooks' response is, don't spin it. One of the things that has become abundantly clear throughout this trial, Darrell Brooks understands exactly what he's doing. His comprehension is fine. I have absolutely no concerns and have never had any concerns throughout this case and throughout this trial or even through the past day and a half regarding his competency. He's intelligent, he's deliberate, he's purposeful. He made nuanced arguments during this trial, one about the right to counsel versus the right to the assistance of counsel. That's a sophisticated legal argument, not the product of someone who doesn't understand. He asked questions on cross regarding tint, horns. He brought up the recall after the fact. He talked and asked questions about, question about barricades, police being at the intersection. Although we never fully understood what his defense was, what became very apparent to me as I reread through all of my notes is that from the very beginning, he wanted to argue jury nullification. If you go back to his opening statements, he talked about power and the jury doing the right thing. He repeated that theme during his closing statement. At one point, he objected to evidence based upon a violation of one of the court's pretrial rulings. Again, a pretty sophisticated objection that resulted in the court striking an exhibit that had previously been received. Today, he spent close to 2 hours talking on his own behalf without any notes. He covered a variety of topics. I want to talk next about, here's my note that I found. One more thing on Mr. Brooks. You know, at times, right, we've seen the eye rolling, the fake clapping, the laughing, hand gestures, many times and most times very emotionless, unless he's doing those things, which would be really inappropriate and are inappropriate. His reactions are largely negative when things are not going his way. What did this community suffer as a result of this tragedy, this malicious conduct by Mr. Brooks? Well, I think many of the victims who spoke said it best. Lori Locken described it as this: a sense of personal safety you robbed from us. I believe it was Bill Mitchell who said, the only life he seems to value is his own. Jason referred to it as evil. And he talked about innocence being stolen. He called the defendant a coward. No remorse. What he said is, you look like a monster. You look disrespectful to court and witnesses. You look like a callous jerk. But I forgive you. Such character, such compassion. Margaret talked about the mental, physical, and emotional toll this has taken. She talked about how it was so traumatizing that her mind won't let her see everything that has happened, and that she's worried when her mind might allow her to do that. I'm thankful that she's 95% back to normal. She talked about emotionally every day. She's reminded of the physical pain and the loss of self. But she's had tremendous support from family and friends, and that today she will move on. Jeff Rogers also commented on the lack of remorse and sympathy for the victims, how he has had to relive just the immenseness of this, the confusion, the anxiety, depression as a father, and irritation. He talked about how his son, Caden, was so concerned for his younger sister. I'm really glad Riley is okay. I believe that was from the day of the parade. And how he recognized he was inches away from losing 3 of his 4 kids just because of where they were located. He had flashbacks of grabbing his daughter's jacket, missing the first time, but that Riley gets up sometimes 6, 7, 8 times a night. How this was supposed to be a happy kickoff event for him as their new president, and how after it happened and in the aftermath, the weight of the moment, and 35 people there trying to find everyone, weighed on him. He talked about the media showing up at his door and the emotional toll things have taken. It was intense, and speaking at Jackson's funeral. He talked about how his faith is stronger. Again, very gracious, very inspiring. We heard next from Jessica and Juan, and how this impacted them, the loss of their son's friend, Jackson. Their kids were involved in 2 different groups that day. One, a dance group, not the extreme dance group, but a different one. And then, of course, the Blazers. And how, I believe it was Jessica who said, I yelled stop. I put my hands out as if I had the power. How she saw Jackson, and how she will forever have that image burned in her memory. And that she was so grateful when she found her son. How she covered his eyes to shield him from what was around. Not once, but twice they had to run, because at first it was what happened through the parade, and then the active shooter situation, because of obviously people didn't know who had fired the shots in that moment. And she talked about pain and terror. Many people talked about PTSD. I mean, for her, I was really struck by how difficult it has been because of what she saw, not able to be a teacher, how she's hyper vigilant, and every sound sends her into a panic, how her joy has been stolen, and how she does her best to hold it together for her kids. But when she was alone, she cried, she screamed. And only a month ago was she able to return to work, but in a very different capacity. She commented on the lack of remorse by Mr. Brooks, and that he seems to search only for sympathy for himself. She said he will always be a danger to society. We heard from more individuals. From the Blazers, again, a lot of discussion of PTSD. The sights and sounds of the SUV plowing through, the impact to her and the kids, the nightmares, how parking lots are problems, there's panic attacks, that no one will ever be the same. Of course, we heard next from the Sparks family. They're hurt, angry, they're traumatized, they're broken. It was difficult to even watch them make their statements. Their hurt is palpable. She talked about her last hug with Jackson, the horrible sounds she heard. She saw a police officer holding Jackson. She went to Tucker, and then her world came crashing down. She talked about how she found a hat, both boys' hats, then shoes. Again, I didn't realize how significantly Tucker had been injured until she described that for us yesterday. How Tucker somehow blames himself for his brother's death. It's not your fault, Tucker. It's Mr. Brooks's fault. One of the things when there is a fatality with all of these victims is the future that is robbed from them, right? No future weddings, no future graduations, no future grandchildren or children, no plans. It's just gone. It's all memories. And the contrast with, frankly, what Mr. Brooks will have, and that is even a life in prison, he'll make memories, he'll have phone calls, he'll have visits. He may even get to hug the people that he loves again. For the 6 individuals who lost their lives, that will never, ever be a reality. And that this family also talked about the lack of empathy, lack of remorse, no apology. I'm aware Mr. Brooks wants to come back. It says, I don't intend to interrupt in any way. That's not a pledge. He needs to pledge that he will not do so. I need that word in that statement. And if he does that, I'll bring him back in. I'm going to try to go a little bit faster. Some of the comments. The yells and screams from that night will haunt me for the rest of my life. I'm asking the court to give the max for each conviction because he has given the community a life sentence of these memories. I think it was Tyler's mom who talked about the community rising like a phoenix. You clearly have a phoenix for a son. He's strong. He got me a little bit with his comments. Wasn't expecting that. You're an amazing young man. You're a picture of resiliency, of fortitude, of strength. I think what this community needs. I thought it was quite a testament that you took those pictures and the same pictures of Jackson, you replicated that, and I thought that was a great tribute to him. You talked about, of course, rising up with Eric, who had significant injuries as well, both of you, and how you fought back and each were able to play baseball, even if not up to the full capacity that you had done previously. And then we next heard from Sasha, who's haunted by survivor guilt. My heart breaks for her. She talked about feeling empty, how she couldn't play soccer because her kicking leg would hurt from the injuries she sustained. She has difficulty sleeping, struggles with nightmares. Physically and emotionally, she feels stuck. She talked about maybe law school being in her future. And to her, I say, don't give him the satisfaction of holding you back. Rely on your friends and your family and be the phoenix that Tyler's mom spoke about. Jen Dunn read a statement from Sasha's mom, and I wrote this down. No one knows what it's like to stand on your feet when there is no floor. That's a pretty powerful image. I think that's very apt for what this community has gone through. We heard from others, including the Teagues. We saw photographs. So many families with more than one individual who was injured. How baseball for Eric was stolen, how he was such a good player. We heard a lot about night terrors and, again, PTSD and trauma. One of the individuals talked about humor is good medicine, and I would echo that. We heard about one band member whose instrument may have very well saved his life. Someone described it as a mental massacre, though, the aftermath of this. It's difficult to go downtown. It's difficult to get restful slumber. Panic attacks are common. Describe Mr. Brooks as sheer evil in its vilest form. I wrote down that despite all of the impact and carnage, many people talked about forgiveness, brokenness, sorrow, anger, hatred, regret. A lot of emotions. Frankly, really no emotion shown by Mr. Brooks, certainly not for what he did on November 21st. We saw a lot of anger for some of the people who lost loved ones, and understandably so. Many families were devastated. Nannies and grandmas were taken away. Yes, there were very specific terms used to describe Mr. Brooks, that in their opinion, he's a monster, he's a demon. Pure, unrepentant evil was one of the phrases that were used. Talked about the system failing us. Saw you in your SUV hanging out with a smile of satisfaction on your face. For one of Leanna Owen's sons, I lost my mom, and I wasn't always a good son. You can hear, right, the regret in that statement, because life is short, and these lives were taken far too short. We heard the very gracious statement from Michael Carlson, who, unbeknownst to me, had been writing Mr. Brooks in jail and sharing the gospel and the love of Jesus. He read a poem, which I thought was beautiful, from the standpoint of his sister. And he said this. In that poem, it says, "We both died that day. I, Tamara, died to life. You died to the world." And then, of course, the Sorensen family talked next. They talked about never seeing their Grammy again. You murdered my mom. But at least I have some peace knowing she died doing something she loved. We heard from Brooke yesterday and today. She reread her statement due to the interruption. Proud of her for getting up here and sharing that. We talked about how compassionate each one of these individuals who died were. We heard about the compassion from Detective Casey that we learned about. It said Detective Casey came to our home to verify what we knew, and then he greeted us every day of this trial. they ended with, "Angels watch over us." 6 angels watching over us today. They asked me to hold Mr. Brooks accountable so that he will not have the opportunity to hurt anyone ever again. We heard from the Kulik family about the empty space that they have and the brokenness, their lives being shattered by mom and grandma being taken away. We heard from her youngest daughter among them. The grief was so palpable, being 17 and in high school as a senior, now a first year in college. She talked about all of the things she will never have with her mom. Just the last year alone, an 18th birthday for her and her brother, graduation, and beginning college. She lamented that her mom would never see her do her wedding vows, never see any kids that she would have, be a grandmother. She wouldn't be able to call her mom for parenting advice. And how excruciating it was for that family to wait 3 hours because of the chaos at the hospital. Talked about triggers of their PTSD, sirens, things of that nature. And how she waited. She waited hoping that Darrell Brooks would have a reason. She also said this, verdicts don't bring my mom back. No more hugs, no more dinners, no more talks. My mom was the glue that kept our family together, and we are falling apart. Moving on, Leanne talked about her safety and security being stolen by this defendant. She asked Mr. Brooks to picture his own daughter, unresponsive, lying on the ground with a leg injury, a head injury, and blood coming out of her mouth. She talked about the excruciating 2 weeks in the hospital, wondering if her daughter would ever live, in a wheelchair and then a walker for months. She said this, all you had to do was hit the brakes. Her daughter talked about being scared of everything, worried about a sister, being alone in a church for 3 hours on lockdown because of what was happening in the aftermath. And we heard next from the Urell family. A family that, of course, was impacted significantly with 4 of their children, all of their children being struck by the SUV, with the mom, of course, having to testify, in this case being called by Mr. Brooks, which, of course, was his right to call witnesses. But it's the manner in which, I think the indifference, not caring that this was someone who had 4 children impacted significantly. But clearly, you're raising your kids the right way. With grace and dignity, Charlotte got up and talked about the basic things you learned in kindergarten. She described what she saw as being stupid, delusional, and egotistical. She wanted to punch you in the face, and understandably so. I think her words were, "Your arrogance is pathetic," and her mom echoed those words. And then the gut-wrenching survivor guilt that you heard from her mom. She goes, "I say this with a heavy heart. I have my kids here. I had to fight for my children. They will strive." And then, of course, we heard from Alyssa in her heart-wrenching statement. She, of course, testified bravely, but you could tell the impact that this had on her and what she saw in the aftermath to the extreme dance team. How one of the girls who at 10 years old, even lying on the ground, being injured, had the wherewithal to ask, why would someone do this? If a 10-year-old knew this, then the defendant knew this. And how she left the hospital not knowing if she would see some of her girls again. She was completely and utterly broken, forever changed by this event. She waited. She talked about how she waited for remorse, for empathy. It didn't happen. Dylan Urell said something very insightful yesterday, something we didn't hear about in the trial, but because of where he was at on the parade route, around the corner, waiting for his children, he didn't even know that all of them were in the parade. He said this: you hit the brakes to go around the corner, and then you drove through a barricade where an officer shot at you 3 times. Those brakes were working. You knew how to use them, and you selfishly only used them so as to not crash your own vehicle as you fled the scene. Talked about walking through and around that corner through the wake of carnage, bodies all over, women, adults, children deceased, people running all over. We heard from more of the members of the extreme dance team, either directly or parents and loved ones, how they had to walk through the carnage to find their children. Such a gracious statement of love, talking to Mr. Brooks about being a Christian and how she prays for him. Very powerful. Thank you for that. Her daughter, equally as powerful and brave and gracious. But even she knew, she said that I thought about you every day. How could someone do this? More victims talking about PTSD. How even the song that was playing during the extreme dance team performance is a trigger for her PTSD. And how she's forgiven him. We heard from the sister of victim HH and how the first thing she talked about was the sound of Vivian Urell whimpering, crying, and then she found her sister, how her clothes were ripped off. She was unconscious, half naked. How she felt forgotten because her mom was at the hospital with her sister, of course, due to the severity of her injuries. How her sister was in a coma for 2 weeks, but how she has survivor guilt and issues like that, panic attacks, PTSD. She can't be around fireworks, tires screeching is a trigger. That this turned her life upside down. And then, of course, we heard from victim HH herself. So brave to come here. I'm so very thankful you are recovering. Someone commented on how amazing it is to see the many people in recovery. You wouldn't know by looking at them, of course. The emotional and mental injuries are significant and severe, but so grateful. Frankly, lucky to be alive. I say to you, that scar on your neck should be a sign of strength and fortitude. You fought, you won. You have a story to tell. Don't shy away from it. Of course, we heard from her mother as well. We saw that PowerPoint with the pictures of their journey. The road rash on her face was horrific. You can only get a mental picture from words so much, but to see those actual pictures, her being intubated, and it's heart-wrenching. And all of the surgeries and the toll it took on their family. But she described her daughter as a warrior. I think all of you here are warriors. We heard from Sam and her family and what she went through and how significant her injuries were. And her mom talked about the haunting vision she has of just what she saw because of her perspective. Sitting in the back of the pickup truck, she had a front row seat to horror. How she thought her daughter was dead because she was unresponsive, and blood, and really kind of the chaos and the confusion, and not really even being able to articulate what happened over the phone to her husband. She described what happened as careless and reckless. Asking Mr. Brooks, how could you do this? What kind of father does that? The last person we heard from was victim, I think it's Gigi, the mother of FF. If I have it reversed, please excuse me. And how I actually have her written statement that was provided earlier today, but how she was so taken aback by the conduct of Mr. Brooks that she frankly called him out on it yesterday, because he was kind of motioning his hand like, okay, come on, let's get this over with, hurry up. She yelled at him, you don't care. She goes, you hit me, I saw you, you knew, you're a child killer, you're a woman killer. She was so flustered, she had to really gather herself before she could continue. So again, I want to thank the victims. I have other statements that I've read for people, so gracious. I think they were all members of the Catholic communities. Their statements were translated, very gracious, praying for Mr. Brooks. So I just wanted you all to know that I've taken all of these statements into consideration today. I can't read your sign, Mr. Brooks. Can you hold it up closer? If it's a pledge that you will not interrupt me, I will bring you in for what will be the final section of my remarks today in the sentencing portion.
Judge, I think you should give them that opportunity before you go through
I'll do that.
sentencing factors. And I can only read the top where it says objection, but
I can't tell what it is, what it says. He can bring the sign with. We'll clear the courtroom. We'll take a short break, and I will bring him back in. But I will warn you, Mr. Brooks, if there is one interruption, you will go back to that room because you will forfeit your right to be present for the sentencing portion. We'll be in recess until we can get him back in. Thank you.
Well, we're gonna get one more outburst before the end, at least.
Yep, we're gonna get one more before it all ends. I think we should break and come back with another stream.
Whatever you want to do.
Yeah, why not get more content? Bye.